Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jason's Take On podcast with myself, Jason Noble, here in London, and my partner in crime, Mr. Whitehead. Say hello, Jason.
Hello, Jason.
We've not done a podcast for a couple of months now, Jason.
I know.
But we've been hard at work. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and I have had to cancel a couple that we had in the works. Not cancel, postpone. And one of those that we've had to postpone, is the one that we've got on today. We've got the one and only Jay Nathan back with us. A massive welcome back, Jay. You've been writing some incredible blogs and articles, newsletters recently, and there was one that really made me think and resonated with some great conversations I was having in London with some peers, some friends, about the long game with customer success, and it really resonated. And I think, I would love, as I said at the time, love to get you on. It's only taken me 6 weeks to actually manage to find a slot that works for us all. So Jay, welcome back, sir. How have you been?
I've been great. Thanks, Jason. It's been a busy summer. And so, the timing has worked out perfectly, as we talked about before the show. So glad to be back. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking to the Jasons.
I so you said, both super excited, and this is going to be a great one. For those of you that don't know Jay, and I don't think there are many people out there who listen that don't know him, Jay's the Chief Customer Officer at Higher Logic. He's one of the founders of Gain, Grow, Retain, a phenomenal community out there around commercial customer success, leadership around customer success. And if you're not already part of that community, do join. Jay's worked in leadership roles, I think, in all of the post-sales, the traditional post-sales customer-facing part of the business. And you've built up a really phenomenal way of, I think, thinking is the only way to describe it, thinking and how to do business and drive customer outcomes. And you've got some really superb experience. And you did a podcast with us, man, it's 6 months ago. It's ridiculous. At the beginning of the year, which seems like yesterday, again, in response to one of your newsletters, but talking about strategic behavior. I don't know how that's 6 months ago, but what have you been up to so far for 2023, Jay? We're now in H2. I mean, how's the year been so far for you?
Yeah, it really is crazy how quick the year's flown by. I don't know if many people know this about my job, but I am the Chief Customer Officer at Higher Logic, but I also, we have 2 business units, and for one of those business units, I run sales, product, our entire go-to-market around that as well, including customer success and the back end of the customer relationship after the sale. And so I've been getting a lot more exposure to what it looks like to run a full business, right? Not just thinking about the customer experience and the customer success part of it, but also the how do we go win in the market, and how do we compete with those that we're competing with? How do we make a name for ourselves? And so that's been a big part of my focus this year. I started doing that early last year, maybe April, Q2, early Q2 of last year, calendar Q2. And it's just been a pleasure. I mean, I came from running my own business. I sold the company to Higher Logic. So I like to have my hands in a little bit more than just customer success, which I think, a lot of the things that I'm writing about these days are way beyond the scope of customer success. You probably see that. It's really more how to think about SaaS, how to think about, the type of businesses that we're running within this bigger world of business. So I'm just having a lot of fun exploring that, but that's been keeping me busy, along with family and friends and all that kind of stuff.
It's like you weren't doing enough previously, so you've now expanded the role.
I always tell people, if you want to learn about customer success, don't read about customer success. Go read about everything else. Like, learn about finance, learn about sales, learn about marketing, because you have to understand a business to really understand customer success, because you don't deliver customer success unless you have a successful we maybe get into
I think you're so right. And Jason and I, with some great guests on our own, we've had conversations around this, and we all know I think it's kind of a period of change for what we've called customer success over the last 5, 10, even 15 years. And it's that wider commercial revenue responsibility, visibility. What is it really? and we've said, but I think that breadth across all the different roles, how it interacts with them, what it's really about, and what it means to these other functions is so critical. I think, Jay, what prompted me back in June to reach out to you was the post that you'd written about playing the long game, and how Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, how they invest as part of Berkshire Hathaway, and they're so-called, I think they called it their sit on your ass investing approach. And it was surreal, because only the day before I'd been talking to someone about just this need to think longer term, about not just about investing, but about customers, about growth. And it's something that I think in SaaS, and particularly in the startup world, we're challenged with. We've got short-term, quarter-to-quarter approaches, much short-term focused on ROI, and particularly for those early stage businesses, it's you can't just say, yeah, think about it for 35 years. You know, when Warren Buffett was talking about how long has he had Coca-Cola as a company, an investment, 35 plus years. Yeah. So that there's a disconnect, but I think we've got to introduce that way of thinking, and that business philosophy approach, that how do we change? How do we think about things differently? And I don't think there's a switch that we can all flip to make that change, but I'd love to hear your thinking. What made you write the article? What was kind of drew you into that?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm going to put in a plug for another podcast that I love. It's called Founders, and this guy David Senra is his name. I don't know him, he doesn't know me, but this guy's amazing. He actually had dinner with Charlie Munger as part of what he's been able to do with his podcast. He's a young guy like us. He's probably younger than us.
I don't think that word means what you think it does.
Well, we'll have to compare notes. But his basically what his podcast is all about is he goes and reads biographies and autobiographies of incredible people, most of them being founders of companies, but also, like right now, I was just on my daily walk, I was listening to his podcast, one of his podcasts on Winston Churchill. So he's done Kobe Bryant, he's done Michael Jordan. And he does a great job of pulling out the real stories behind these people and their incredible businesses, their incredible accomplishments, and then correlating their behaviors and their activities and their mindset across one another. He's just very, very good at it. So if you haven't listened to that podcast yet, I would highly recommend it. It's been an inspiration to me. But let's see, you asked a question and now I've already gotten lost. Like I started listening.
What prompted you to write the article? Going into it.
I went and reread it today, and the first line in that article says I've gone down a rabbit hole because I had listened to a couple of podcasts on Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett. I had been reading the book The Snowball for a long time. I listened to several of his podcasts. I ended up reading another book called The Tao of Charlie Munger, which I also linked to in that article. Would recommend it. Just all these little aphorisms and quotes that Charlie Munger says. I mean, just simply brilliant wisdom is what I would chalk it up to. And I was like, these guys think about the businesses that they invest in a lot differently than most of the companies that I've worked with before think about their business. And I've worked mostly in B2B SaaS my entire career, right? So, but they think long game. To your point, the sit on your ass investing, Charlie and Warren Buffett will tell you that they feel like they've probably made 10 decisions in their entire careers, of their 50, 60, 70-year careers, that have made Berkshire Hathaway what it is today, including like investing in Coca-Cola in 1988. Like, so whereas, we all feel like we have to be constantly moving, changing, doing new things, trying some, you can't appear to be sitting on your ass, right? But what is the strategy where we really take a long approach, and instead of trying to do big things every quarter, it's just like, no, let's do the little thing today to make us 1% better. And then we'll do the same thing tomorrow. We'll do the same thing the next day, same thing the next day, right? And that's called compounding, right? We all know that from hopefully our personal investments. Compounding interest, Einstein said it was the eighth wonder of the world. Those that understand it benefit from it. Those that don't understand it will they'll be paying it, right? And I think, if we think about our companies in the same way, then we have a real opportunity to build some really amazing companies over time. But we do have a short-term focus, and it's largely due to the way that, and this is not a knock, and I'd love to hear y'all's perspective on this, but it's largely due to the way these companies have to be funded, because technology companies are expensive to get off the ground. So the question is, how do we get them funded and yet hold on to that long-term vision for the market, for our product, the solution that we provide to the market, so that we can be not only just a player that we can, turn around and flip this company in 2 or 3 years and sell it and make $1 million, 10 million, 100 million, whatever it is, but how do we really solve the problem for the long term? Let's make ourselves billionaires, not millionaires, right? In 30 years, you just have to wait a little longer. Anyway, so what does that conjure up for you guys? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective too. And I think there's probably also a distinction between the funders and investors like a Buffett, who like, what's my return as an investor, compared to a founder or CEO who's trying to build this business and please those people. So what's your thoughts on, trying to get that longer perspective and that senior ass approach? How should the executives of a company try to drive that? And what are the implications for how they structure and fund and build their CS programs?
Yeah, I think the crux of it is really, how do you think about making your money on these companies? Mm-hmm. So we'll stick with that for a second, right? How do the executives and the investors intend to make their money? Is it cash flow? And is it profits? Or is it enterprise valuation? Right. And I think what you see in our world, at least in earlier stage companies, it's all about the valuation, right? It's all about, it's like buying a house and flipping it, is the way I think about it, right? You're gonna fix it up, you're gonna
great analogy,
put hardwood floors in, and then you're gonna sell it to the next buyer. That's like another private equity firm or another, VC firms usually come in multiple at once. But so I think you first have to think about, okay, founders of companies and investors in companies should make money. They should make a lot of money, right? Because they put a lot of risk on the table when they do it. So, but the question is, how do you think about how you're going to make money? Are you going to actually build a profitable business, or are you going to build a fast growing business that the enterprise value is growing faster than the cash flows? It's interesting. If you go another fascinating human being to read about is Jeff Bezos. And from the very early days, in the '90s, mid '90s, when he started writing his shareholder letters, he made a statement that I believe they still hold true to today, which is when they have the option to prioritize future cash flows or present day revenue per the generally accepted accounting principles, they're always going to choose future cash flows, right? If you have cash, you are in charge. So it's also about having control to drive your vision in the long run for a company. The more of your company you own, the less of it you give away, the more you can have control over what you do with it and where you take it in the long run. You don't have to take those profits off the table. You don't have to take that debt on to leverage investors. You can actually invest in your market, take those profits and pour them back in. So it's building the snowball. So you asked a very specific question though, Jason. How does that apply to customer success teams? I think, we probably talked about this last time, but if you think about the long game, then you think about the entire company being in customer success. I was on another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about SaaS companies are customer success machines. There is no SaaS without customer success. There is no customer success without SaaS. It's part of the operating model. The real customer-centric elements of SaaS are the business model, really, and some of the the technology that's evolved underneath how we deliver the business model from a product standpoint. Those are the real innovations. It's actually not customer success. The real innovation is you can get out of a contract anytime. You don't have to pay me $1 million up front for software. You can pay me $100,000 this year or whatever. Right.
Do you think, but based on that, what do founders, executives, is there how do they shift their thinking to think more longer term? Is there something they can change, or is it just it will naturally evolve? You've got your early stage founder that has to think more about that shorter term, what we're trying to do, those shorter timeframes, and then as you perhaps go public, you go IPO, different investors come in. Does that thinking change? Or, is there a natural evolution, or are there some fundamental changes that we need to think about making to generally think more long term and shift what that value time frame is that we're looking at?
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of built into the founders, right? The executive team. If you're going to go choose a company to work for, what is the psychology of the founders? I think people are hard to change, right? And it doesn't necessarily go from, I got to think short term now to I'm probably going to be thinking long term. Like, I like to see a company who, I mean, again, Bezos, like in the early days, he was raising a lot of money for Amazon, but he was very clear in his 1997 letter to shareholders. He said, like, hey, look, I'm just going to remind you, this is our long-term vision. And again, you're not always going to see things show up on the short-term income statement, but you're going to see it in future cash flows. That's what we're going to prioritize. If you're not in for that ride, then it's cool. Like, go invest somewhere else. But know that that's our strategy, and that will not change. And it hasn't changed. I mean, I'm sure you could argue that it has over time. They've had to become a little bit more short-term focused, but not really, right? I mean, they've continued to invest. So the pessimist in me, Jason, says you either have it or you don't. You don't really change, right? Because when you go public, things get much more short-term focused. They get quarterly focused, right?
So how do you think things would look differently if initial stage investors said, hey, we're here we don't want an exit for 10 or 15 years. How would that change the way management approaches growing the company?
Well, I think you would probably do more organic selling. Sales in marketing has gotten super, super expensive.
Yeah.
You just look at what's happening with Twitter and Facebook and as these social media, outlets become more mature, their reach gets lower, the cost gets higher. So from a pure social media perspective, and it's a crowded world we live in everywhere else, not just social media, but the airwaves, the streaming services we subscribe to. So, but I think you would do a few more things organically. Hey, I feel like, when a VC comes in, and this is a gross generalization, so I'll just preface by saying that, but typically when you get an A round of investment, that's a serious round of investment, right? And those VCs expect you to spend money quickly. And they give you a lot, but then they expect you to quickly turn that into future cash flows for them, right? Or future cash flows for the business. And so you hire a lot of salespeople, you hire a lot of BDRs, you hire a lot of marketing folks, maybe before you even know what works, right? You have a general sense of what's working in your go-to-market, but you don't have a real firm grasp on how to scale it yet. Yeah. Throwing money at that problem doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It sometimes just makes it worse. Now you're inefficient. And I think you're seeing that, right? You're seeing that, and you hear and read on LinkedIn every day and read these articles about, over 60% of the sales force is under 50% of their quota for the year, something like that. There's all kinds of metrics out there. We've invested in sales and marketing to a point that it's not sustainable and scalable yet, because scalable, I think, as we talked about last time, isn't about just making it bigger. It's about making each incremental thing we do a little bit more efficient, right? Yeah. So if you add another customer, it should cost you a little bit less to add the next one than it did the last one.
I think I was going to say, Jay, you point there about, naturally your founders and execs have to be, it's a certain type of individual. It really is, and they've got to be more willing to take those risks, and quite often be prepared to shift very quickly and change. So there's a natural short-term thinking. And I love Jeff Bezos, I think, absolutely, Amazon to start with was a bookstore doing this. Right. And his is what's missing sometimes, that very clear long-term vision, because Jeff's vision has been to be the most customer-centric business on the planet, and a big, bold statement like that. And there are some things that Amazon do, and they do them so well, and absolutely, you could see where he's going. And it actually, not changing the conversation, but you wrote another post about being customer centric shortly after this long journey one, and how a lot of companies think they are, but most aren't. How would you define, and it's great because I love, this is almost bringing it full circle, the fact that Jeff's vision is around being customer centric. How would you define what it really means? You know, what does being customer centric really mean for us today?
Well, it's great. That's a great parallel, by the way. Very, very. I'm sorry to do this. I gotta let my dog in because he's scratching up.
Some background music while that's happening.
Sorry about that. When everybody else leaves the house, then the dog comes.
You're in charge, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about some of the things that Amazon has built as a customer obsessed company, it's not just it's not customer service per se. They weren't throwing humans at it to be more empathetic and high touch. They were designing customer centric processes from scale. And actually, even before that, they were building the infrastructure to do what? To provide the lowest cost goods to their customers. So that was part of their strategy, right? It's sort of like Walmart, sort of like Costco, right? Is we're going to build this massive infrastructure and buying power to bring the lowest cost to consumers. So right there, like that's completely different than what we do in the technology world, right? We want to charge as much as possible for our software because we spend a lot of money developing it, but everything over time on Amazon tends to get less expensive, except for their Prime subscription, of course. But you're building customer centricity into the entire thing. It's a little bit like Southwest Airlines too, right? They have a strategy of being a low-cost carrier. They know who their customer is. They're not targeting the business traveler. They're targeting the everyday run-of-the-mill traveler, and they're going to give them the lowest cost, best experience that they possibly can. Is it going to be a white glove experience? No, and they tell you that up front. So, sorry, tangent. But if you think about all the other things that Amazon has done, Prime is a great example. They rolled that out. Their board was like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, shipping is so expensive. Is this going to work? But he thinks about it like a flywheel, right? You design these customer-centric processes in, it drives more customers to the site, which drives more people to sell in the marketplace because they also allow their competitors to sell against them on their platform. Mm-hmm. Very customer-centric. They allow reviews, positive and negative, on their products and their competitors' products. Very customer-centric. So at every step of the way, Amazon has optimized for customer centricity, not by employing an army of people to talk to customers. It's a B2C, of course, but by engineering it into the way that their platform and their offerings work. So it's just a completely different mindset. So my question is, tying it back to customer success, I think of CSMs as a channel, right? CSMs are a channel through which you can communicate to customers, through which you enable customers, but it's a very expensive channel, right? Whenever you have a human involved doing a high touch thing, it's expensive. I don't care if you sell something for $4,000 a year or $400,000 a year. It's expensive to assign a human. You have to manage that human. You have to coach them, train them, all that kind of stuff, right? And then their performance, you have to monitor it. But in some places, we need those humans to do those things, especially as you get up toward the 400,000 side of the equation, right, on the ARR. But how, if you were going to build your company from scratch and that customer centricity from scratch, wouldn't you start the way Bezos did and build it into your product first? And a lot of product teams don't think that way, right? They're building a solution. They're not thinking about how it gets implemented. They're not thinking about, how the customer has to use it every day, or they're not thinking about how to make it less and less effort for the customer to use it every day necessarily, right? They're just getting more features out. So
it's fascinating you've said that because you're right, and I think that's what a lot of businesses are challenged with. But is there this massive chasm, and there is a gap between leaders, founders, people like Jeff Bezos, and all these other great, and I think a lot of them are B2C companies that actually have a better understanding as to what it means. A lot of them, not all of them. But is there always going to be that big gap? And can some companies and people just not make that shift in thinking? Like you say, we're just going to stick products and features out on it. How do we stop that? How do you really make everything customer centric by design, customer obsessed? But I don't like the phrase obsessed. It applies negativity, but centric, customer focused, building everything from design. How do you get that built in? Because I think that's what a lot of people are missing. And I think you do. You get some amazing product teams out there that build great features, great products, great services, but they're not thinking with the end customer in mind all the time about value.
I think well, a couple of things come to mind when you say that. One is you said it earlier, the vision has to be really strong. Like, what do you want to do for your market? How do you want to do it? What do you want to do and how do you want to do it? And then I think, one of the things that also comes out in these stories that I've been studying is that with all of the greats, there's usually not a lot of committee decision making.
Yep.
There's somebody who has that strong vision. It's not a vision that's being created by, putting a bunch of people in a room and saying, hey, let's brainstorm and figure this out. And that's something that that I've as I've reflected on the reading that I've been doing, it's like, well, I'm a big believer in teamwork to get things done, and I always have been, but that's execution. When it comes to setting a vision and choosing a direction, I think you have to have somebody who is bold enough to pick a direction and get the team rallied behind it and say, no, we're going to go this way, right? And then it comes back to the control too. Do you own enough of your business, back to the financing piece, do you own enough of your business to be able to say, look, this is the way we're going to do it? And like, come hell or high water, we're going to burn the bridge behind us and we're going to go. And I can say that because I have that much. I think there's a lot of companies that don't have founders. They may have that vision, but they've given away so much of their business in terms of how much money they've had to raise and how much of the equity they've had to share and how much of the quote unquote advice they take from people who know how to do it better than they do or have been close to it, maybe never been operators, the investors. And I'm not knocking them, we need them, but it's hard, right? Those two things, I think if they're lacking, then you're not going to get this long-term purview. Does that make sense?
It does. I sorry, Jess, I was going to say, I love the thinking that you need, because I'm the same. It's about teamwork. I talk about we rather than I, but you need those two types of people. You've got your visionary, and they've got to be someone that's got an idea, that focus, and that do those great ideas come from committees? Probably not. It probably needs one person, one dream, one vision. And I think it is then that it's the coming together of those two groups, and maybe the ones that are very successful are the ones that it's where those two groups work really well together. You can still work very founder-led under the founder's vision, but you've got that more collaborative group function that can focus on delivering execution.
Those are fun things to work in too, right? When everybody's pursuing something, it's like bigger than themselves. They're much more fun companies to work in.
Absolutely, and it's a very ambitious and powerful place to be, where you're all trying to focus on something that's bigger than all of you, what you're doing.
Yeah.
I've worked with several organizations where people are very committed to the organization and very kind and want to build they want a high performing team. They believe in all the stuff, but sometimes they suffer from not giving enough direction or not being quick enough to say no and saying, no, we're going this other direction. So I think it is that tough balance of, it's when to have a committee versus when to be very clear. Like if you have a vision, how to quickly correct people who are straying off of that and bring them back. Jay, when you were talking about giving away too much of your ownership, I can't remember who said it, but the golden rule of he who has the gold makes the rules. And I think there's something to that as well too.
Yeah, that might have been a Buffett quote, actually.
Yeah. So I'm curious though, Jay, from your perspective, you've worked with a lot of companies, especially as it relates to being customer centric, that think they're customer centric, but probably aren't. Can you give a couple of examples of how that manifests itself in a B2B org, and how the people listening to this podcast might be able to say, oh, that's us, or we now recognize that we're not as customer centric as we should be, and being able to recognize that and figuring out how to pivot.
Yeah. I think, one of the telltale signs is, again, if you're throwing people at it and if you think customer centricity is having a highly empathetic support interaction, or having a CSM who will, compliment you and tell you happy birthday when it's your birthday, and celebrate when your kids graduate from high school. This is all lovely things, right? And I'm not knocking that. Please, I hope nobody takes it that way. But that is not customer centricity, right?
Mhm.
That is just what kind human beings do when you have a relationship, right? Like,
Yeah.
my buddy Jeff, you guys know Jeff Kushmarek? Have you heard this guy?
No.
You would love to talk with him sometime. He's got a little podcast of his own, and he's very articulate, and but he did a post just this week. He was like, hey, I've had a bunch of people come to me for executive CS roles and say, because he's a consultant, he talks to a lot of companies, and he's like, 50% of the profiles that I look at talk about being empathetic and customer centric. And he's like, why don't you just cut that and like go straight toward like be a business owner, right? Prove that you're a business owner. You know how to drive revenue. You know how to drive renewals and retention and customer advocacy. Like, talk about business outcomes. And guess what? Like, sales teams should be empathetic and customer centric too. So you're not differentiating yourself by saying you're empathetic or you're customer centric. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting parallel. But yeah, I mean, look at where you're throwing people at problems, because if you're throwing too many people at problems, there's a great chance that as soon as the business starts to falter at all, you're going to have to get rid of those people, right? You see it happening all over the place right now. And guess what? If that's your method of customer centricity, it's now gone, right?
Mhm.
So again, like, are we innovating on behalf of the customer? Or are we just competing with our competitors? Are we copying what they're doing just to keep up? Or are we doing something new and innovative? That's the product team, right? And the executive team, they have to have that vision. Do you have a vision that extends beyond the next funding round for the company, right? Where are we going in the long run with this thing? Where does it go? What else?
That's where that longer term, you want the response to be, yes, I've got a longer term vision and it's not changed. This is my long term moonshot, if you want. It's that really big, ambitious goal. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm going to do. Yeah. And that doesn't change. That doesn't change quarter to quarter. Yes, you've got the shorter term, more tactical, sometimes strategic, but you've still got, this is where we're going. This is the goal that we're trying to get to. And I love, there was a thing you talked about in your post, the original one about the long game, that infamous letter from Jeff Bezos back in 2013 to his shareholders, when he says that Amazon focus on their customers, not their competitors. And that's such a big difference. I'm not worried about the competitive market. Of course he is, but I'm still focused on that long-term thing. I'm not going to just add features and functions and benefits to differentiate us just because customers are asking for them. What I'm going to do is do something that's going to create that long-term a viral growth loop that just keeps adding more value and delivering more value for them. But I think it's a disconnect. I think a lot of us are struggling with that today. And particularly in times where there's economic challenges, cash flow becomes so much more important. You've got to sometimes focus on the shorter term, but I think you always still need that, right? This is what we're trying to do.
I got a question for you guys. Have you ever seen a customer stay for a long time because you built a feature that they begged for years or for quarters and quarters? Usually you do that kind of stuff, and then, not to be pessimistic about it, but some business change happens on their end, the stakeholders leave, and you still lose the customer, right? So you're much better off if you're looking for the next wave of innovation for those customers and applying it there. That's not a customer success function per se, right? I mean, CSMs can contribute to that, and they have good visibility into it. Sorry, my dog, I'm going to have to go close the door now. Can you hear it?
Just one little bark. Feed me.
Okay, good. Doesn't sound like a little one to me. Thank you for Zoom. So yeah, I mean, that's the biggest telltale sign, right? Is where is your product headed? And is it headed in a direction that everybody on the team believes in, or are you just, trying to get any feature you can in there to try to save a customer? That's a telltale sign, going back to the last question you asked, Jason.
Right. No, I think that's a great point. Just one thing before we move on as well too, because I see we're getting close to time here. I'd love to talk about being long-term focused and all the things that we've talked about, but Jason sort of brought up quickly, in these current times when things are a bit of a downturn, we're seeing some companies, really slowing down and either laying off staff, whether it's CS or otherwise, and things like that. What should companies be doing to balance their need to be long-term, customer-centric, and CS focused versus the short-term realities of the marketplace and the economy today?
Well, I mean, to survive and be viable, and to make it to the next stage, you gotta free up cash flow. So the first thing, it sounds crazy, but to be customer centric, you actually have to be able to control your own destiny, and to control your own destiny, you have to be in control of your P&L, right? And your cash flows. And so, I think the first thing to do is what you see a lot of people doing, which is you got to cut the fat, and you've got to get really down to basics. If you're doing 8 or 10 things as a business, like strategically, it's too many. You got to pick 1 or 2, and you got to go all in on those, whatever you believe is going to be the future of the business. So, even Jeff Bezos, and I've read most of the shareholder letters because I'm reading Invent and Wonder right now, it's basically all the writings of Bezos. And in every single one, he talks about scrutinizing cost, right? And if you're gonna provide, a high value, low cost solution to a customer, then you yourself have to watch your costs. And I think it's an area where over the past decade, we've, as an industry, gotten lax, right? Is just, we spend, right? We talked about sales and marketing earlier, but it's not just that. It's we spend on perks and all these things that we conflate with culture, right? But it really is about, making yourself viable so that you can be the last man standing, last person standing, and serve your customers in the long run. So I don't know, that's just one thing that hops to mind. But what do you guys think?
I think you're so right. And we could talk about this, particularly with you, Jay, for hours. And this, I love the way this conversation's gone over all sorts of different directions. It's a challenge. And I think, you've got to look at businesses now. How do they grow? And as I said, particularly look at where we are, look at the challenges we've got in the economies locally. We've got environmental challenges. The world's shifting and is very challenging right now. And I think to balance all of those things together is tough. You've got to invest and attract the right people, the right team to help you deliver and execute, but you can't overdo it. You've also got to make sure that you're building up a function that can scale and grow. And it becomes very difficult. And I think my take on it, I don't think there is a single answer to any of this. Right. And I think a lot of these founders are doing the right thing. And I think with any of this, it's the right person coming in that's got the right mindset, that's willing to take risks. And we need those people. And sometimes it's not going to be right. Sometimes it will fail. But what those people are able to do is pick it all back up and go and try something again with what they've learned. Yeah. And I think that for me is probably the take home from this. I don't think, as much as I hate to admit it, I don't think there is a magic switch that we can flip for any of this. And I think there are some phenomenal examples out there. And going right back to our first thing about that, think about the longer term, make sure you're all attuned to that vision. Have you found to really come back and articulate that vision, and not just internally, but that's very important, but articulate it and say it out to the market. Tell people what you're doing. the idea that, Jeff Bezos publishing, there's a book, like you say, of his shareholder, and it's a great read.
Mhm.
But who else does that? Not many people.
Yeah.
And it's a different way of thinking.
Right.
If that makes sense. So I think, I think there's lots of great things for everyone to listen to here, to take away and say, right, we do need to make these little incremental changes. And you say it's those 1% changes. It's the idea of the aggregation of marginal gains by all of these little shifts that you don't notice, suddenly massive, massive changes. And I think you've got to think short term to what's that small change I can make today, but what's it going to do for the long term?
Jay, I think also you hit on something interesting of the, preserve your cash, and that there is a lot of fat out there. And in fact, a lot of the CS teams that I'm working with, and some of the personalities you described, like very empathetic, but that's not this. I think there is, even today, a lot of fat in CS teams, either the wrong people in the wrong role, or, what you said about, software, the price always goes up, it never goes down. Sort of the opposite of Bezos. And what just occurred to me as I was listening to you was how quickly we've forgotten some of the lessons of the lockdown, where everyone was losing all their customers very, very quickly and doing anything to keep them. And, how do we lower our prices? How do we extend our contracts? How do we do whatever it needs to be just to survive? And it seems like right now people have sort of forgotten some of those lessons that we need to survive first. It's sort of like, Maslow's hierarchy before we can get long-term thriving. So I appreciate you sharing your insight. That really triggered things for me as well too. I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that in a while.
It's like sitting on the airplane. You got to put your mask on before you help others, right?
Absolutely, but that's what people forget about. But it is that mentality. Jay, look, this is. I'm going to break from tradition because I think you've already answered what we were going to ask. We're not going to give you our traditional bold challenge question. I love the conversations with you. They are great, and we could talk for hours more. But I think there's more of these to come. If you're going to keep these emails coming, and I'm going to read it again and say, Jay, I need to speak to you again. But this is, I think it's so topical. It's front of mind for everyone. These are challenges that everyone's going through now. So it's just superb. Let me give you a shameless plug for those few people that don't know who you are. Shameless plug for what you're doing, how people can reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. LinkedIn is the easiest. You can find me on LinkedIn by typing in Jay Nathan. Customersuccess.io is my newsletter that Jason has referred to a few times. And if you haven't joined it yet, please sign up for Gain, Grow, Retain, gaingrowretain.com. And it's a wonderful set of resources and people and networking. It's a community for customer success leaders. And the more people that are in it, the more valuable it is. We have over 12,000 members now.
Fantastic.
And we have I'll put a plug in for this. We have a live event coming up in Denver, Colorado. We'll also be doing one in Salt Lake City area, in Austin later this year. Denver is, I want to say, August 29th. If you go to gaingrowretain.com, you can register for a spot in that. It's free. Networking, food, fun. It's great. We really love these events. But I really appreciate hanging out with you guys, because I always think we have this higher level of discourse that you don't get in many places. And so I appreciate you always reaching out, no matter how long it takes us to schedule. I'll do it any day with you guys. So just
you're a superstar, man. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation with you.
You guys too, always.